much as I can all the time, and if I'm not playing, I'm usually thinking, dreaming about it, looking at my stats in school, showing it to my friends, telling them my guild stories,
Well, virtual reality, you can be who you want to be, and you can be where you want to be, and with whom you want to be.
I couldn't physically pull myself away from the console.
Hello, I am Aaron Franz of theageoftransitions.com. Here with me today is Tom Secker of investigatingtheterror.com and also spyculture.com. We also have Adam of cerebralrevolt.com. All of us are here to have a group discussion about video games and virtual worlds, their emergence in our real world, and the sort of problems that arise with video games, the sort of problems that aren't being talked about, at least not enough. So we all are getting together to talk about video game addiction and the like. So if you haven't listened to the first part of this series, this is the second part, so be sure to go back and listen to part 1. And we talked a little bit about video game addiction. And with that, I want to say hello to both of you, Tom and Adam, and what do you have to say about this new episode here?
Well, hi everyone. It's good to be back with you both, and I'm sure this is going to be another interesting hour. Yeah, I mean, as I said, people should listen to the first hour really, and sort of consider some of the points that we're trying to get across in that first hour, because we'll be touching again on that, and then looking at some of the other aspects of this whole phenomenon, such as the connection to the military-industrial complex, which is a it's a big long conversation, put it that way. There's plenty of information there to be discussed. So I'm looking forward to getting to that. What about you, Tom?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think we did a pretty good job in the first hour of looking at the sociological and psychological impact of video games and more broadly just the digital life. And I did like the way that we went into some depth on how all these things are potential gateways to what would ultimately be the digital replication of human consciousness, the giving up of physical existence and becoming digital entities. And so, people should go back and listen to that, and particularly have a mind to, we kind of went through the different kinds of people who are likely to be enticed into this. And I think that is certainly worth people listening to and having a think about how that affects their own life. And it's great to be talking to you both again. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, we're talking about virtual worlds here, virtual reality as the alternative to real life. And we actually have the people who are developing these technologies are pitching this as something better than real life in a lot of different ways. I know we talked a little bit about Second Life, but you have the creator of that whole program very emphatic about the whole thing, and he's kind of saying that, as opposed to what we said last time, how these are sort of decaying people's ability to have actual relationships with one another, he says it's enhancing it.
Yeah, it's nourishing it. It's making it better. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That was his angle, definitely, for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, what do we do in the face of this? Because if we bring up the subject, it's a taboo now. People don't recognize that there is such a thing as video game addiction, let alone that we should even talk about it or how we could. So what do we do about people kind of saying, hey, look, this is a non-issue. In fact, video games are wonderful.
Yeah, well, it's a hard question to deal with. I mean, it really is, because as we talked about in the first hour, and again, I'll reiterate the same basic kind of concept that I was trying to get across was, the general impression that one is given through the mainstream media on the subject of video games is that they're basically okay, and that there's all these different applications for them psychologically and for education, and psychological development, and even healing and all kinds of different things. But it's only very, very occasionally that you will ever see a solid counter argument being at least aired or put forth in any sort of mainstream media platform or channel, to the whole concept of video games being good for you. It's very, very rare. I mean, there's a few documentaries out there that do sort of ask some of the harder questions and try and dig a little bit deeper. Digital Nation by Douglas Rushkoff is one of them, which I'd recommend. There's a few other sort of mini documentaries. BBC Panorama did a sort of a half hour focused on this once as well, so people can look those up. But apart from these very small examples, it's like you were saying, it's the whole idea is that these things are just great, and it's just not the case, it really isn't. I mean, the fallout from this stuff is incredible, and I've experienced it myself.
Exactly. Yeah, you have. I know I have too. I just, from playing video games, I think anybody who's played video games just knows inherently they are addictive. I mean, if you're honest with yourself, you can see that it has the addictive quality to it. And that's just common sense to me. So part of this is we're ignoring our common sense and our intuition and just our feelings about things that are kind of quite plain and simple. It's confounded by what we're told over and over again, or what's omitted from the official story. But what's your experience with it, Adam?
Well, as I said in the previous, I had sort of, like a basic Sega console when I was young, and I pretty much grew out of all that stuff by the time I was about maybe 10, 12, at the latest, and that was really it. But then again, about, I don't know, maybe I think between 3, 4, maybe 5 years ago, I was flatting with somebody who was a really avid gamer. He had all the the full, like every console that was out there, and big television and home stereo system and all the rest of it, and home cinema, the whole deal, and stacks of games and everything. And I didn't really have much interest in it, but to be honest, there was one situation where I got around to, playing just one of the free demo games, I think, that comes with the Xbox 360, which is called Trials, and it's basically a fairly simple game. It's basically, you're just maneuvering like a motorcycle through these, obstacles and doing jumps and, trying to get your time as low as it can be. And, it's kind of like a rally cross for, motocross for bikes, basically. And there's, all these different tracks and, all, the difficulty obviously increases as you progress, etc., like any game. And, it was a lot of fun. I got into it and I got really, really into it really, really quickly. All of a sudden, for having not played any games for years and years and years, I found myself getting actually quite addicted to this game. And it got to the point where I was doing, sort of like 12, 14-hour marathons of the game. And I had an experience once where I'd been doing one of these marathons on the game, I'd been playing it for, basically, I don't know how long. It could have been anywhere between 8 and 14, 16 hours, something stupid, And I went to bed, afterwards, and I had basically what amounted to a lucid nightmare, really, is the best way I can describe it. I actually thought I had a nightmare where I actually thought that I was in the game and I was running this game, and it was actually it was so real. It was, if people have experienced lucid dreaming, they'll know how real it feels. It's almost indistinguishable from reality. From consciousness, from waking consciousness. And I had this experience, where I was actually in the game. And I crashed the bike, and the bike erupted in flames, and I was trapped under some structure or something, and I could see and feel and smell like my whole body erupting in flames. And at that point, I just screamed and woke myself up. So it was it was the body's reaction to getting yourself out of that situation. People who've had nightmares or sleep paralysis will be pretty familiar with this. I've had sleep paralysis before as well, and but basically the way to get out of it is to yell as loud as you can to wake yourself up. You can't move physically, but you yell to wake yourself up, and that's basically what I did.
I know it.
my flatmate, the guy who actually got a console, had said to me, he also commented a number of times. He said, I've heard you yelling out, like screaming out in your sleep a number of times now, and it's actually really freaked me out. He said the screams were, pretty disturbing.
Yeah.
You're just right out in the middle of the night, and this is all around the time I started playing this video game. And after that experience, that was it. I was like, no thanks, no more of that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Horror.
That was a pretty scary experience. And I mean, we would look at these videos on YouTube where the one we were talking about last time, where the guy the little kid gets his World of Warcraft account deleted and has a complete freak out. I mean, whether that is true, that video itself is real or not, it doesn't matter, because this stuff is going on. It really is. I've experienced it myself just from being into a game for a few weeks. And I mean, imagine the impact it's having on people who are playing this stuff year in, year out, like literally their whole lives as they grow up, and some of these documentaries I mentioned before, you can see clips on YouTube. There's tons of them, actually. Obviously, they're not mainstream media clips, but you will see these little sort of mini focuses, or maybe sort of like a local TV station doing a focus on some kid who's just totally lost his mind altogether from playing video games. Literally, he's totally lost the plot. He's not in reality anymore. He's not a natural, normal, functional human being.
And you're absolutely right, Adam. And I did watch some of those clips that you sent round. You sent round links to. Excuse me. But one thing I did notice is that in all of these news clips, and particularly in the BBC Panorama documentary, is that this was often being framed not in terms of what I thought was the most profound impact on these people's lives, which is that they were becoming socially alienated and socially incapable, but it was that their grades were suffering, their education was suffering,
exactly.
They weren't getting on in their education and their career and their the life narrative that they were supposed to have. And the focus wasn't really on the fact that none of them had girlfriends, none of them had any interest in finding a girlfriend, none of them were really developing the friendships that they already had. I mean, that was what they were really losing, I think.
Yeah.
Whereas, of course, it was all, they weren't getting the grades that they were last semester. And I'm kind of like, well, I can kind of see why, if that's what people are being told, that, that's what you're sacrificing by doing this. They'd just think, oh, well, what the hell? I'm not sacrificing that much. Whereas you emphasize to people that what they're really sacrificing, what they're really losing, I think you'd get through to more people. And I think these pieces would have more impact and more effect. I mean, what do you think?
I totally agree, absolutely, and it's a shame that there isn't more of it around in terms of mainstream coverage. That actually do ask some of these more profound psychological and social questions regarding the impact of video games, especially on developing people. People who are in their formative years, basically, whether that be from age 5, age 5 to 20, age 5 to 25. 30, whatever you want to call formative years, it's having an impact on you the whole time. So, I mean, I think that's probably deliberately spun that way, though. I mean, especially with the BBC, the whole narrative here, as we discussed, is basically to present video games as being a positive thing. And so, if you're gonna critique them, then make sure you critique them in such a way that you can. It's not going to do the long-term agenda any damage. It's like, okay, well, it's causing some issues with grades, but so what we'll need to do is just improve the video games and make them a bit different, make them less addictive and more educational, and that's that problem solved.
Rather than any fundamental rethink what's going on.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's probably the angle that I'll probably playing there on that one.
You're absolutely right about the formative years and kids playing these things, and it does shape who they will be. And me, being a father, I look at things in a different way, and I see these pieces, and it makes me think, okay, what's my son like? How's this going to affect him? Because obviously it will. With virtual worlds, video games, and all that, it's just going to be something that I'm going to have to deal with, that he's going to have to deal with, because even now he's not even a year old, but if he gets a hold of a tablet or a cell phone, his face lights up. It really does. I mean, you should see it. It's amazing. It's like, oh my goodness, this is like the look of pure joy on his face. And then he starts touching the screen and moving it, and he knows what he's doing. So I mean, obviously, it's something that we all have to deal with now.
Just the way computers looked 10 years ago, the average operating system, be it Microsoft or Mac, and then look like an iPad or an iPhone works. It's almost like a kid's toy. It's got big, flashy, big, colorful buttons. That you can just swipe.
It is. It's a kid's toy. Absolutely right.
It's like a toy. It's like a kid's toy. And so it's going to be so. I mean, and there's a bit of a bit of childhood in all of us, so to speak, and so we all, feel sort of attracted and fascinated by these things to a degree. But I mean, especially for kids, the stuff that Apple's been putting out, and the whole touchscreen technology, and all the simplicity of it all, and the sort of the moving things around with your fingers, and I mean that is absolutely perfect for kids, absolutely perfect.
And there are also educational initiatives to bring tablets and all these things into the educational process. I mean, this is something that's literally happening. It's like government initiatives that are, and as adults, it's easy to lose track of that sort of thing, I think.
Well, it's because I think I just remember growing up, just the whole consensus, whether it be in the media or whether it be family members or people you spoke to on the street or whatever, the whole consensus was that, computers are great. Computers are great for education. Computers are great for, teaching kids, and kids have got to have computers these days. And, you've got to get your kid a laptop so they can, learn on the internet and do they were definitely promoted very heavily as educational tools and must-haves. For people when the personal computing era started in the mainstream,
it's even more so today.
Absolutely, more so. It's even more so. It's just growing, especially with the release of all these touchscreen technologies, and especially the stuff that Apple puts out. I mean, don't get me wrong, I use that stuff as well, but I mean, it's you can see it's you can see how the sort of the simplification and the reduction of the operating system and the way it functions down to its most basic sort of sensory level in terms of touching boxes and moving them around with your hands has been designed to draw a younger and younger generation into the world of computing and virtual environments and games and the whole thing.
Yeah. Now we're talking about the sort of human-centered interface. What are your thoughts on this, Tom? The interface changing like that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right that they've infantilized it. They've made it much more childlike and much more child-friendly. But also, I mean, I recently, as in literally a few days ago, got given a tablet as an early birthday present. And I have been kind of playing around with it and seeing what it's capable of. And I admit I did go and have a look at what games were available for this tablet. And one I noticed, which I thought was absolutely chilling, was a game whereby the objective is basically to infect humanity with a virus. So you have to chemically develop a virus and then release it. That seemed to be the purpose of the game. So, that's a rather gross and horrible indication of where all this is going. But
and where it's come from too.
And absolutely, in terms of a eugenicist angle. But the thing that particularly bothered me about the way the Android operating system works is that it has very little customizability. There's very little you can actually do to make it function in a different way. And even Windows, you can do quite a lot to just make it function more quickly to do certain things, or you can turn quite a lot of stuff off very easily and just say you don't need any of that. With the Android operating system, that has so far proven virtually impossible. Basically, you have the options, which are, like you say, the big flashy buttons. You either push that one or that one. But apart from that, you can't really do anything else. So although we discussed in the first hour how one of the ways these things are being sold to people is the sort of infinite customizability and the ability to express your individuality through technology, in reality, these things aren't very customizable. They're actually extremely uniform. They're extremely military and regimented in the way that they work.
Absolutely. And that's for the integration of all the different applications and programs, and all the different that ties, of course, into all the different surveillance programs and all the rest of it. I mean, obviously that's going to be the way it's going to go. Considering the objectives that the military-industrial and corporate, whatever complex you want to call it, this whole Leviathan, that's behind video games, is going to want to happen. So it's all about integration, really.
It's another thing that people will take for granted as well, because the interface will determine all your interactions with everything on that tablet or whatever, what have you. If the interface is limited, that creates the entire structure for this virtual world, if you will. And that, again, everything is being taken for granted. And as you're mentioning here, military-industrial complex, I think if you even bring up that term to anybody and try to relate it to this, especially, they'll be like, "What are you talking about? This came from Steve Jobs. I don't know what you mean."
Yeah. What people don't realize, though, is that the military are developing all kinds of different programs. They're basically giving funds out to the top universities and think tanks right across the states. A whole bunch of different programs running right from the 1960s in terms of how they could use technology, things like virtual environments, and sort of simulated situations to train soldiers, and basically through that series of experiments and research, R&D projects, basically the video game ended up being the game where you're pushing keys on a keyboard, or now it's joysticks and controls, but the whole concept of the single player or multiplayer video game was actually a result of long-term studies funded by the military into how they could train soldiers better, and so of course that now has become there's a basic a tie into all the first person shooter games that started coming out in the 90s that were basically developed by the military for training soldiers, and they were sold off to the private sector.
So they used those game engines to make commercial entertainment products.
There you go. They're one and the same, really, the commercial and the military. And I have another little life story here too, if we want to hear it. I live here in Southern California, where the military-industrial complex thrives. There's many different, you got your Boeings, your Raytheons, and Northrop Grummons. Those buildings are just peppered all across LA County. And then you also have big game developers here too. So I know somebody who has worked at a game developer for, I won't say the specific one even, I don't think it's even matters really, but it's one of the games that is quite obviously a military game where, one of those games where you are a soldier, first person shooter, massive multiplayer aspect to it too. So he would work on that game basically, and he told me that military officials would come into the office and that they'd kind of like check in and just like consult and things like that. So I mean there it is. They do come in to the video game as part of the development. They come into the office.
I think this is basically just the the residue of a long-standing relationship. I mean, there was a research paper done by a bunch of I think it was I'm not sure if it was a German couple or a German family. It was Renate and Rudi Hansel did a paper. I forgot the name of it, but they were basically, they basically studied, the links between the military-industrial complex, especially the army as well, and basically video game, companies. And there's one of the quotes I took down from the document. It was they basically were saying. During the 90s, the killing simulators employed for hand-to-hand combat in the U.S. Army and police were released by the Pentagon to be sold for private use on the public markets. As a consequence, the computer and video game industry that had cooperated with the Pentagon from the very beginning boomed. Since then, the so-called killer games have wreaked havoc among children and youths. So that's one of the few studies that actually, has gone into the actual real background of where these games have come from and what kind of effect they're having on, today's, population, especially the younger generation, the youth,
Well, and I'd also, if you do find resistance with people saying, "Oh no, this hasn't got anything to do with anything. This isn't real. This connection." I'd also point people at a first-person shooter that's actually made by the Army, by their own in-house software crew.
Oh yeah.
Called America's Army, and you can download this for free. I haven't played it. I watched a couple of minutes of it on YouTube just to make sure it was the sort of game that we're talking about here. And yeah, it's a first-person strategic shooter, and it's all about glorifying the military. And this is used both for recruitment purposes and actually for training. It's used for both.
Yeah.
And even when I was kind of having a bit of a flick around reading about this, I found that there is actually a spin-off comic, like a graphic novel comic, that you can download that is based on this game, and likewise is used for recruitment purposes and propaganda purposes. And I read the first issue of this today, and it's like the worst war film you've ever seen. It is so thinly disguised. It's not even disguised, it's just kind of openly propagandistic, and it's all about, going into some country because there's some humanitarian disaster with some horrendous dictator with an Eastern European name that has to be taken out, blah 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 blah. And yeah, when I was reading about this, I came across an interview with someone from Comic-Con, the big comic conference, saying that there were representatives of the Department of Defense actually turning up there, promoting this thing and trying to, recruit computer nerds and recruit comics nerds as part of this whole process. And that, I think, is absolutely fascinating, because if you think, they're not the sort of people the military would normally be reaching out to. They're really not. They're the sorts of people who genuinely want to kind of hide away in their bedrooms playing computers their whole life. They're not going to join the army.
Eating pizza and smoking cigarettes, and not getting any sleep.
Guys who, if they went in the army, they'd just get pummeled. But instead, now we have them even reaching out to them, which I think is really crossing a threshold, culturally speaking, from, instead of recruiting the jocks, they're now recruiting the nerds as well, if you like.
Well, I think part of that is probably just not even for perhaps actual physical military operations, but perhaps for more like intelligence related espionage and surveillance operations.
Well,
I mean.
Drone piloting,
for drone piloting, and of course, even just simple things like that. The story that came out last week about how the Edward Snowden released documentation about the CIA, FBI, and NSA all infiltrating Second Life and World of Warcraft, A, to spy and surveil supposed terrorists who they believe to be communicating through these games, and B, to actually recruit insiders from the games to collect information and report back to them on them.
Yeah, so, you know what's funny? This leads you to think the classic internet troll that leaves all those idiotic and terrible comments all over online. These people are probably, or could be, kind of like the ideal recruit for certain jobs like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these people who, basically just, I don't know how to describe the personality type, but, the chip on the shoulder personality type who will basically, align themselves with whatever radical cause, they find, they find a sort of amicable and fulfilling at the time. Will just go around, just slacking people on the internet and telling them that they're wrong and that they're superior and they're more intelligent. I mean, there is a demographic out there that exists that are like that. So
they get pleasure out of denigrating others and doing it not face to face, but like from far away through computers. That adds a whole nother bizarre element and quality to this. And it's an element of the virtual world that we're all coming to begin to understand. But at the same time, I think it deserves to be noted that the military is likely far ahead of us in understanding, the psychological phenomena at play here. That would be my assumption, at least.
Well, that's what I'm wondering about, is the infiltration of what it says in this Snowden leaked document was GVEs, games and virtual environments. The infiltration of that, I didn't really need a Snowden document in order to tell me that was going on. But what I do wonder about is what is their ultimate purpose here, or even their immediate purpose, because as it says in this document, it's all about terrorism, but that's utterly ridiculous. I mean, what kind of Al-Qaeda cell or whatever so-called terrorist you might talk about would meet up in World of Warcraft? I mean, seriously? And even if they did blow it up, it's only pixels anyway. But so I'm left wondering, what is that a smokescreen for? Because terrorism is the catch-all excuse for absolutely everything that the military-industrial complex is doing these days. I get that, of course, but what is it that they're really gaining from it? Because I understand black operations in the real world. I understand them exactly what they get out of that, what they get out of false flag terrorism or whatever. But what do they really get out of this?
Good question.
I mean, you have to speculate, but I'm kind of asking for your speculation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of that, the infiltrating games for, to supposedly, track the movements and communications of terrorists. I mean, obviously, I don't really buy that whole, the war on terror thing, and a lot of other people don't. I think it's greatly exaggerated and used to advance other agendas. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. But I mean, when I just look back to, for example, that document that Snowden released recently from the NSA. Basically, there's a quote there where they say GVEs are an opportunity. We can use games for C&E exploits. I'm not sure what C&E stands for. Tom, do you know what that stands for?
I am not sure. Let me have a look at the carry on, and I'll have a look at the document.
Yeah, it says C&E exploits, social network analysis, human targeting. It's human targeting. So it's human intelligence targeting, obviously. ID tracking, photos, document IDs, shaping activities, geolocation of targets, and collection of communications. And then it goes on to say it has been well documented that terrorists are OPSEC and tech savvy and are only getting more so over time. Blah, 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 terrorism. And then they finish off by saying, through targeting buddiest and interaction found in the gaming and on gaming websites, social networks can be diagrammed and previously unknown signals, intelligence leads, and connections and terrorists to cells discovered. GVs can contain online presence indicators, geolocation, and ID tracking can be gleaned and used in apprehension operations. So again, they're throwing the whole terrorist thing, but really, I think, for the rest of us and for the majority of this program, is used for, just basically general day-to-day surveillance of everybody, really, as has been exposed recently by people like Edward Snowden, although, he's not the first one. I mean, he's just reiterating a whole bunch of stuff that people have been saying for years. And, I have my own thoughts about him, and that's another conversation altogether.
Yeah, we've all got our doubts about Edward Snowden.
Yeah, to put it mildly.
Yeah. So what do you think, Aaron? What do you think is their kind of ultimate purpose here? What is it that they're getting out of this?
Well, I do like the point we're making about the terrorism, because anything that is being hoisted upon us as part of whatever agenda we want to talk about is framed in this safety and security context. And again, you get the terrorism scare in here, like, ooh, the terrorists, you know all about them, don't you? Well, we got to deal with them, and we got to deal with them in every single facet of life. And lo and behold, this whole virtual world concept is a burgeoning reality. It's something that we're all being told that, well, it's here in one sense, but it's certainly coming even to a greater extent to a home near you. So you're going to be living with all this. And again, this is the ultimate point that's made in every single documentary you're going to watch on the subject. You'll find that it always ends with somebody saying more or less that, okay,
it's happening.
It's happening.
Yeah.
This is the future, like it or not, we're going to have to deal with it. So, I mean, we're being told from all angles that this is happening. This virtual world thing is coming. And it is, to an extent, here already. And that's fascinating, too.
Well, and going back to what we were talking about before in the evolution of the way in which we interact with these electronic devices, another thing that occurs to me is that whereas it used to be you'd have probably a keyboard or some very simple gamepad, you'd be clicking buttons, you'd be doing something where there was clearly a mechanical interface between you and the machine. Whereas now it's your movements themselves, whether it's flicking.
You are the controller.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whether you're talking about the Microsoft Kinect thing where you dance around and then your little guy on the screen dances around, or whether you're talking about a tablet where you're flicking your fingers around on it and actually physically touching it yourself and it's responding directly. you're more directly involved in the physical process of actually controlling the computer. And I suppose, the mouse was an early incarnation of that, and the joypad, and then you get the joysticks and what have you. And now, like I say, it's your actual physical motions themselves that are the controlling mechanism.
Mm-hmm. The marketing reflects this. The marketing rejoices in this too. It's like, look at how cool this is. You're the controller now. Whoa! That's me just being childish. But I mean, they talk to us like children in this material, and we react like children. I think you hit on that point before. There's a child in all of this, so we react to these things.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, just look into the homes of so many people these days. I mean, the video game is no longer something that the teenager or the child plays. It's something that is often enjoyed by the whole family. And I've seen this in a number of different scenarios. Where the whole gaming console, be it like what's that one where you've got the guitar and the drums? It's like
Rock Band.
Rock band, and like a lot of the famous, like rock guitarists have got on board with it and done promos for it and stuff. I think it's called something different over here in the UK, but
I know Ringo Starr did a promotion for that game. They had a Beatles version of it, actually, I believe, a few years back.
Yeah, I think we're talking about the same game. I think it's just called something different in the UK. But there's there's been so many different guitarists and musicians get on board, basically to promote this stuff and just talk about how great it is that we're moving the world of music into the digital realm and allowing people who otherwise weren't so musical to now take up some kind of musical instrument practice, whether it be guitar or drums or whatever, something like that, and I found it to be, I've played it before, and I've found it to be the most unmusical, most unenjoyable thing I've ever done, considering the fact, I play the guitar, so, and I used to play the drums, and so I play it for real, and to me going and playing one of these games is just horrible, it sucks, there's no enjoyment there at all. It's just like, it's like playing Spaceys or something like that, it's just.
I've got to be honest, my feeling is slightly different. I quite enjoyed playing Guitar Hero, but only when I was
Guitar Hero, that's it, Guitar Hero.
But only when I was really drunk. Only when I was too drunk to play the guitar properly myself, because I play the guitar as well, and I know exactly what you mean. I always looked on it with that kind of skepticism, but I have to admit, late in the night.
Well, maybe I should get drunk and play it then.
But yeah, I mean, like I say, only if I was too drunk to play the actual guitar would I really enjoy Guitar Hero that much. And again, it's this infantilization, because if you think about it, it's one of those staple toys that you get for young children, is a little bleepy guitar or a little simple keyboard or something that a kid can play and can get a bit of fun out of, and maybe see if they've got any musical talent in there somewhere. And they've always sold us, this will help your child's education, and you might be able to, they'll then learn a proper instrument and all of this. But now we've got 30, 35, 40-year-old men picking up the little plastic guitars, and if you told them that in any other context, they would say, no, that's ridiculous, that's a kid's toy. But somehow it's sold to them. Somehow they've just missed that facet of it.
And I've seen guys over 50, getting right into this stuff, like seriously playing it like on a regular basis, like on a,
were they most
daily.
Burnt out old rockers or what?
Like kind of, I guess. Yeah, I guess there was a couple of the individuals I'm thinking about could possibly just be described as guys that kind of burnt out rockers that never learned to play an instrument and really regretted it. But hey, here comes this game, and so here's your last chance. But it's not musical. It's rigid. It's almost like it's all about your reaction time. And it's all about you responding to pre-programmed stimuli.
It's as musical as Space Invaders. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it's what I'm saying. That's not music to me. That's more like work. That's more like I don't know, computer coding, or it's very left brain. The way that these games operate. And I think that serves to just I don't know, demystify and degenerate the soul of what music is and what music means to culture and all of that. That's a whole other discussion altogether. But I see a definite trend between those two those two aspects of it. You know, the whole
idea. It does
idea
sort of trivialize musical talent to a certain extent, because it creates this level playing field where anyone can get up and be a guitar hero.
Well, and it mechanizes it. You know, it's all about mechanical. It's not about, you know, learning your own style and, you know, learning how to enjoy it. And I mean, of course, you know, theory is always very important, and, you know, knowing how, you know, the whole theory of guitar and music works is very important. But this doesn't teach you any of that. It basically gives you this plastic thing, and you've just got to push the buttons at the right time, and that's it.
Well,
you know,
yeah, it's a toy. It's a toy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Push the buttons in at the right time, you know, in time with one of your favorite rock songs. You know, I mean, that's not music.
I don't know if we want to talk about it here, but this kind of brings up the point of arrested development, which is a topic of infinite fascination to me. I know that there've been, but this is just another. I mean, I'm seeing it in so many areas. Just this fact that arrested development seems to be a growing thing, I would argue.
Well, I think when you could say arrested development, or you could just say the absolute insane promotion of what you might call a youth cult or youth culture toward older demographics. Yeah. I mean, I notice it in my own neighborhood. You know, I notice it in, you know, when I'm walking around in the city that I live in. You know, I see people who are in their 40s and 50s dressed like they're in their late teens and listening to music that 12-year-old girls would listen to.
That's called a midlife crisis.
Well, not just that. This is everybody. You know, this is a whole. It's like everybody's into the same stuff.
Yeah.
You know, everybody's into the youth culture stuff. Everybody's into, you know, happy-go-lucky pop music. You know, and everyone's into, you know, dressing up and going out and getting drunk, and, you know, everyone's into that whole sort of teenage culture. You know, and regardless of their age. So, you know, whether you want to call it arrested development, I think that's definitely a part of it, but it's also the promotion of youth as being, you know, absolutely, I don't know how you want to describe it.
It's promoting and encouraging arrested development.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that could be. Yeah, that's definitely a valid way of describing the phenomenon. Definitely, yeah, yeah.
I do think one thing I mean, I agree with what both of you are saying, but to kind of bolt something onto that, you've got to remember we're adults now, so we would see it in those terms. Whereas I think if you asked a 12, 13-year-old, they'd be desperately trying to become an adult. I think what we're actually seeing is everyone rushing towards the same ground. Everyone's competing for the same things, and it doesn't matter whether you're 12 years old or you're 40 years old or you're 60 years old. You're all supposed to be competing in the same way and trying to be the same things. And so obviously we as adults would see it as infantilization, and we'd think, you know, we're all in whatever, our early 30s, so we're all thinking, aren't we all getting a bit too fucking old for this stuff? So we would talk about it in terms of arrested development, and that's absolutely accurate. But you get the point that I'm making, that now you've got whatever, a 16-year-old girl going out to a nightclub with her 40-year-old mother, and they're both going after the same guy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's what we're
talking about.
You know.
So on the opposite end, we have the children growing up too fast. If you want to put it that way.
Children growing up too fast, and the adults trying to become youths again. You know,
or ever leaving that adolescent period.
Or never ever leaving.
You rush to adolescence and then try and stay there for 50 years. That seems to be the
you get to 18 basically as a male, and like in terms of your emotional development, and you just basically stay at that level for the rest of your life, where it's just about, you know, fun and video games and fast cars and bikini girls and you know, and beer and football and just having a yarn with the lads, and that's it, you know. And all of your responsibilities is just a burden, you know. It's just something you moan about, and this, you know, I mean, yeah.
Now it would make sense that if this is the sort of common playing field that we're all at, this is sort of the frame of mind we're all in, that we would not be able to understand or point out any sort of real issues that might be popping out, like addiction. We might not recognize addiction because I don't think an adolescent really can understand what addiction is. It's certainly not in an adult sort of way.
Well, I don't think they have the perspective on the long-term life. They haven't lived long enough to understand this is something that could actually come to dominate my entire life, which is what addiction is. So I don't think you're right. I don't think they could have that perspective. Sorry, Adam, go on.
Sorry to interrupt. And they've never had the withdrawal, so they don't know it's an addiction because it's always been there. It's been there since they've, especially for younger and younger generations, it's been there since day one. They've had some kind of a computer, a tablet, or a something, or a cell phone since absolute day one, and they've never ever been without it. So they didn't even realize it's an addiction. And I'm sure. This one of these things that comes up in some of these YouTube clips and these mini documentaries is when the parent will try and take the mobile phone or the computer or the laptop away from a child who has literally grown up with it since day one. They freak out. They absolutely freak out.
Violence. Act violently.
They go into withdrawal. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, violent withdrawal.
And there's a couple examples from these videos that you recommended, Adam, where there's usually a young boy and he's playing his World of Warcraft or what have you. It's taken away or it's somehow interfered with at some moment by the mother, typically, and the boy reacts violently even to his mother. Yeah, I know. Yeah, he was, in one of those videos, he was just saying, he was just screaming at her and calling her a bitch and telling her to fuck off and all this kind of stuff. Yeah,
I was like, whoa.
And really again, intense. To me, I have to play devil's advocate or whatever you want to call it here, that these videos, every one of them does seem staged to me. However, I'm not saying that is the case. It just kind of feels that way. However, the point is that that's a real phenomenon. And even as a man, as a male, I kind of can relate to that sort of darkness, and I understand that as like kind of a dark element within men and within boys. Like that's just kind of something that we can fall into at our darkest point, is that sort of violent reactionary behavior. So it's a real phenomenon.
Of course, we all have that seed of darkness within us. We all have a shadow personality. Absolutely. Yeah. There's no doubt about that. But whether these particular videos, are staged or exaggerated or sort of somewhere in the middle or whatever, this kind of stuff is happening, and I can attest to that myself, through my own experiences and my own direct observations. So it's a very real phenomenon,
Well, one thing that occurred to me in one of those videos that you sent out, Adam, where the lad is sat playing World of Warcraft and his mum isn't even trying to get him off the computer or take his computer away or anything. She's just trying to enter his room and say something, interact with him in some way. And that's
like, dinner's ready or something. Yeah,
it could be something completely ordinary and domestic and trivial.
Yeah.
It's not like there's even a confrontation going on, but he's responding antagonistically and aggressively and confrontationally. And what struck me was that, assuming this clip is real or that this actually really happens, regardless of whether the clip is or not, is that what seems to be being it's that she's interrupting his private imaginative process. He's there locked away in his little game, thinking he's whatever it is that he thinks he is in this game. And she's interrupting that. She's reminding him of the real world where he isn't that. He's just a kid playing a computer game. And that reminder, without actually coming in and saying it to him, or just by opening the door and saying something, she is reminding him of that. And that is painful for him, because then he's got to confront the reality again that he's just a kid sat there playing on a computer, rather than whatever this romantic fantasy is that he's got going on in his head.
Yeah, it's like a sudden big come down or something, back to reality, like boom, and I mean, no wonder anyone who's addicted is going to react badly to that.
Exactly. Yeah. What does an addict do when you confront them? If for God forbid you say, "Hey, you have a problem," they deny it, right?
Yeah, of course they deny it, and of course, they always say that, the first step to overcoming addiction is to actually admit that you're addicted to something, and these people, for the most part, are unable to, because the tools and the public dialogue and the sort of general discourse in the society on these issues is so scant in terms of its critical aspects. It's all just just corporate press releases and corporate sponsored think tank studies that all conclude that video games are great.
And it's also, I think it's also a question of motive, is it not? That if you have the motive, you're given a choice between, okay, you can remain in this idealistic, romanticized fantasy world where you can believe you are whatever you want to be, or the alternative is you confront that you've got a computer games addiction and that your life is actually rather sad and going in the wrong direction. What are you motivated to choose? Why would you have a reason unless you had a particular inner strength to choose the harder path, the path of greater resistance, most people are going to choose the path of least resistance. Of course they are.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Especially children who don't have any real concept of some of those, of making wise choices for their own benefit in the long term. I mean, that's what parents are for, is to try and guide children through those experiences and help them give, the benefit of, or give them the benefit of experience, But, for these children who become so immensely immersed and addicted to these games, any kind of intervention or guidance is immediately rejected, and often, as we were discussing, in a violent, aggressive way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that addiction, just in general, I mean, it's misunderstood, and there's a depth to the misunderstanding as well. It comes down to the way we kind of approach everything, and that's a long conversation too. But we tend to think of addiction as in the physical sense. So there is a controlled substance, and that is what chemically addicts you. And I think we're still in that sort of generic framework. We don't understand completely mental psychological addiction. That's with beyond our framework that we're framing addiction in.
So you're addicted to the flashing lights rather than being addicted to heroin. I mean, it's the same thing, but you're right. We don't understand the addiction to flashing lights anywhere near as well.
No.
The same thing with television. Television is just as much an addiction.
Yeah.
Television is probably a larger addiction than video games for the most part, because it spans all generations. Right from age 5 up to basically death, basically. So I mean, it's one of those things that for the generation that is even in their sort of later years now, that have still grown up with television all their lives. Their entire lifetime, So that is just another example of an addiction that is not talked about, because it's just taken for granted. It's just something. It's like it's almost, the television has become almost like the proverbial fifth member of the household. It's the God box in the room. It's something which people have. It has become part of the environment. And so people don't question it simply for that reason. And I mean, if you look at, B.F. Skinner's work on behavioral conditioning and operating conditioning and all the rest of it, he says, once you introduce something into an environment, it actually, the individual, the creature will adapt, and simply begin to accept it. They won't question it after a certain period of time, They just take it for granted. And the television is a perfect example of that. And I think probably a greater addiction to video games. But, along the same line, video games are addictive for the same reasons, that it's something that has been around for at least, a good, 2 or 3 generations now, and so because it's been around for so long, and it's been part of people's lives for so long, and has had so little research or critical analysis done into it, it's just one of those things that is generally accepted. And so the whole concept of video games or television being addictive is just it's out of the question. It's never even being really considered by most people, because they've just grown up with it. It's not something that's been introduced into their lives and has made them think, or has, changed their lives dramatically in one way. It's something that's just always been there,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We've just crashed into a wall.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. We should probably start wrapping this up now, but I'd like to return to the question that you raised earlier, Aaron, that what is it that we can do about this? Because, I mean, we've spoken for 2 hours on the problem in quite a lot of depth, I think, and I think anyone listening to this will go away with a relatively well-rounded view of what the problems are of technological addiction and computer games addiction, and computer games in a more general sense. I think they'll get a pretty good going over for that. But like I say, the question is, what can we do about this? And so I'm going to throw out there what I said before. The thing that I think would be most effective, and is most effective when I have actually raised this with friends and other people I know, is to remind them of what they're sacrificing, is to point out that, if when they go home, they are looking at their Facebook page on their phone more often than they're looking at their wife, their husband, their child, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
That is something they've lost. That is something that isn't good for them. That isn't good for their life and isn't good for their husband, wife, family, child, whatever. And so,
or themselves.
Or themselves, yeah. And so if you frame it in that way, I think you can get through to people far more than if you, to be honest, if you start talking about the Pentagon and spying and all of that.
Yeah, and to bring it back to an adolescent boy perspective, you can say, hey, you're not going to get girls if you do this.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely true. Yeah. It is true.
It is, yeah.
There are, of course, TV shows like The Big Bang Theory trying to convince you otherwise, but...
Of course, yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Oh, The Big Bang Theory. Oh, my God. I don't know where we started.
We're going to fall down another rabbit hole if we don't watch it.
Yeah, sorry, I probably couldn't have brought it up. But yeah, if you have any sort of different things to suggest as constructive solutions to this, or at least attempts at constructive solutions to this, or anything to add on?
I guess I could probably, just throw in my own generalized view on this whole thing. I mean, I don't have any real. I mean, I think your approach. I think there's definitely validity to that. I think that there are also possible, not negative connotations, but there's possible. The reaction amongst certain demographics to that argument, I don't think would necessarily go down well. I think I think you'd have to have a person who was already, I don't know, cognizant in some way of the fact that, cognizant of what was going on in some way before they could take that information on. Because, I mean, I've tried to sort of have this type of conversation with people before, just the sort of Joe average blue-collar worker on the street, and they'll agree with you, and they'll sort of say, oh, yeah, it's true, we really are, and, there's sort of, they'll appear to agree, but I can see that it's not sinking in. I can see that they're just going to go home and play their video game and just go, oh, fuck it, who cares, So I don't know. I think there's many different solutions depending on what the demographic is and what the situation is. So I don't know how I'm going to put that across, or. And I'm not saying I disagree with you, Tom. I just think that I think that there's different
strokes for different folks.
Exactly. Yeah. Just I think depending on the demographic and the individual and the personality type and how sort of what their lifestyle's like. I think it would depend on that.
Yeah.
I think people who are more, I don't know, as I said, cognizant of what's going on in terms of geopolitics or whatever, or pay more attention to current events. Slightly more sort of intellectually active would respond better to an argument that Tom outlined, rather than the average Joe worker who just sort of plays video games without thinking. He's going to agree. I think he's going to agree with you, but it's not going to sink in. He's just going to say, well, that's just one guy's opinion. I haven't heard it on the news. Until the government or some corporation puts out a press release saying that video games are bad, I'm just going to assume that they're good.
Well, it's the individual versus the collective, as always. Yeah. We always come back to this.
Exactly,
Is the individual person able to find the gumption within themselves to overcome the collective, the enticements of the collective, of all the consensus reality, all the things that are thrown out there to pull you into whatever's being promoted en masse? Is the individual person able to recognize those things and say, okay, I see them for what they are. I am going to overcome them because it's worthwhile to do so. So I guess this is the real issue in this and in anything, is the individual person able to make that first step. And I think when you're able to overcome, I think you'd be able to overcome any addiction. I'm going out on a limb and saying that, but I really do believe that, and mind over matter principle I subscribe to personally. I mean, it's a reality, and I don't think we understand the power of that. So I would just encourage people to try to find it in themselves to make that first step, and when you do, you will start seeing the world for what it is and all the nonsense that's tossed our way, but you will easily overcome all of it. Yeah,
I think so. And I mean, I don't think that. I don't think that it's going to work for everyone. I think there's always going to be a demographic or a subculture out there who are always going to be into the stuff no matter what. Especially people who have bought into the whole transhuman idea and all of those types of different ideologies. I think there's always going to be some kind of demographic, however large it is, some kind of subculture who will always buy into this stuff and who will quite happily, live in the world of video games and exist there forever.
And maybe it was wrong of me to say that it would be easy to overcome the collective enticements and all the bad things, as it were. I guess it's actually quite hard to do, but it's not impossible.
It's not impossible. It's not impossible. It's hard, but it's not impossible. And that's the main point to make here is that it is possible. And if people can become cognizant of what's really, really going on and can think critically about, the impact that these things are having on their lives, then, we may begin to see some progress in terms of people looking at this whole issue from a different angle and, being honest with themselves in terms of, again, how video games have shaped their own lives and their convictions and their habits and all the rest of it. But, again, I think, this is not something that we can't win over everybody on this argument, is basically what I'm saying. I think there's always going to be a crowd who will go along with this stuff to the bitter end and will swallow the pill and will, basically, will be quite happy to, reside in the matrix as some kind of non-corporeal consciousness in a computer program. I think there's always going to be that demographic out there, but for the average person, for the type of person who's listening, or for the type of person who's listening to this show, who maybe has that innate ability to look at things critically and look at themselves more than anything else, I think that there is there's definitely hope there, for them to be able to do that, to really give themselves an honest assessment of what's really going on here, and have a serious a serious rethink about their convictions and their habits, regarding the whole digital world, the social media and video games and all the rest of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a certain group of people that probably can't be helped here, to be honest, but there's an awful lot of people who can be. So hopefully we can finish on an optimistic note there. But I think we should probably wrap this up here. So should we just quickly throw out our websites again? I'm Tom Secker. My main website for this sort of stuff is spyculture.com. Adam?
Yep, I'm from cerebralrevolt.com. Once again, as I said in every interview, it's still being built, so there's not much there. But if people want to bookmark that and check back and, a month or two, I'm hoping to have it up by sort of, in a functioning state by the end of January, beginning of February, and a YouTube channel to go along with that as well. In the meantime, most of the stuff I do can be either found on, Aaron's website, Tom's website, or Thomas Sheridan's website, and a few other places as well, such as the Glasgow Truth Group Meetup Forum. So, yeah,
and I am Aaron Franz. My website is theageoftransitions.com. Check it out.
Okay, I'd just like to thank everyone for listening and thank both of you two for taking part in this roundtable. I think it's gone well.
Yeah, it's been a fun conversation.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I'm sure listeners will as well.
Yeah, I hope people have got something out of this, and I hope that we've had some kind of positive impact, whatever that impact may be.